So yesterday, Biden had an address and he talked about a new gun control approach. I mean, this is not legislation in the House or the Senate because, by the way, the Biden administration has decided it's not a huge priority for us to kind of strong arm Manchin or Sinema into adjusting the filibuster in any way, which means that any gun control measure in terms of legislation is pretty much dead on arrival. But, Biden has some ideas about gun control, which I'm going to dissect shortly, I think are dangerous in many ways. Some of them are common sense, but the framing with which he approaches things is peculiar to me. Let's take a listen.
The Second Amendment from the day it was passed limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there never been, if you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. The point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
Yeah, so Matt, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Well, the first limitation that comes to mind, historically, is don't sell to the Native Americans. And even if it's just the guns that you're willing to part with, right? Because the problem is look, I'm a little bit skeptical of this as an emphasis. I think if you're going to do anything about guns in this country, it needs to be a massive structural thing where you're not just going after illegal sales and stuff like that. Because guess who that's going to end up criminalizing? You're going to have to do something structurally about the arms industry, which the U.S. government sort of exists to facilitate business for. So I'm skeptical of this as an emphasis right now, in the light of what's not being done, right? Is the PRO Act, that's just we're not something we're going to do now. We're not going to do anything on healthcare. Pelosi's talking nice about the infrastructure, saying we're not going to do the bipartisan thing unless the reconciliation bill gets done. I'd love to see that happen, but I'm just skeptical because, and just to double back to the point about guns is there's a lot of communities for which, and I'm not saying this is smart. I think statistically you might accidentally, discharge your firearm and kill somebody with it. But there's a long history in this country of a need for, or a desire for a firearm for communal deterrence. Right? We get callers in who are I'm Black. I feel having a firearm in my community is nice because I don't necessarily trust the police in case something happens. Right? And that's a problem with, these need structural fixes and not just criminalizing certain types of behavior, in my opinion. And I think it's just risky politically. I think it speaks to the Bloomberg type liberal who is a technocrat and is going to blow any kind of type of populism into the right.
Yeah, all of what you said makes sense. It's essentially, being tough on crime, criminalizing responses to poverty by, using that exact language where it's essentially owning the libertarian type who wants their AK-47 and not addressing root causes of what makes people unsafe. So as I mentioned or hinted at earlier, part of this proposal includes reallocating coronavirus funding to the police. So last summer, we had mass protests about defunding the police, and Biden has said this before, maybe we should give police more funding because then they can be better at their jobs, which is just so indicative of his small thinking on this kind of topic. No. They don't need more funding. You don't need to throw more finances at an institution that's structurally insufficient at the very least, but it's not just insufficient, it's murderous. And it's unable to meet the needs of the community and keep the community safe. If safety is truly the priority, and it's not just arming and giving more money to police departments for toys for them to play with, then what Biden should be doing is reallocating that coronavirus money that would be going towards police combating gun violence, and by the way, illegal gun sales. Like, talk about small thinking as well. It should be going towards housing. It should be going towards health care. It should be going towards infrastructure in high crime areas that allow people to go and be safe in. If safety is actually the priority, then you would be investing in housing number one, because a lot of what causes violence in these areas, and where we're seeing an increase in gun violence, and by the way, the rest of crime in 2020 went down. Rapes, etc., everything that didn't involve, or theft, I believe. I'm not exactly sure, but most of, and in other nations, crime went down in general in 2020 because people were indoors, even nations that had stricter lockdown measures. So, I mean, it's about targeting the root of these things as opposed to, as Matt said, giving a speech that kind of throws red meat at the Bloomberg types who want to hear about how stupid it is that right-wingers love guns. Yes, we need more gun control measures, but it's not going to be dealt with in a piecemeal way. You've got to abolish or amend the filibuster, and then we can have a conversation about gun control, because whatever Biden's doing here, it's insufficient at the minimum. And mostly what it's doing is just giving more money to cops, which is exactly what activists and the left did not want. It's counterproductive. And I mean, like, the exact wrong response to what we saw over the summer with the George Floyd protesting goes to show that the Democratic Party was not interested in doing anything legislatively about this. They saw the conviction of Derek Chauvin and they said, thank God, there's no pressure on us to actually put legislation through. What, Matt?
I was just saying, absolutely.
Yeah, and they want to fundraise off of this. They want to fundraise off gun violence, and they want to fundraise off of Black Lives Matter and not really do anything about it. I mean, they're complacent in that area. So Biden's putting together this very tiny package about gun violence that does not address root causes, that might criminalize people who are already hurting, and they're going to say, okay, we're done with it. But, like, glad he got to own right-wingers in that statement. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but to me, this is just, like, indicative of many larger problems by Joe Biden.